Does eating protein kick you out of ketosis? Everyone's very afraid of eating too much protein or just enough protein to kick themselves out of ketosis. They're trying to stay in ketosis, deep ketosis, for long periods of time, and they don't want their glucose to rise at all because they don't want to be kicked out of ketosis. Well, breaking news, everybody. This is something that, it's one of those moments where I hate to say I told you so. Not really. I've been saying this for months, but just recently, Coach Stephen Thomas, who I've had on this channel before, has recently come out and publicized his anecdote about what happens whenever he consumes a large bolus of protein. And it turns out that yes, his glucose does increase, which, oh my gosh, Eddie, that means that my worries have been correct. They've been validated. Well, he put them side by side with his ketone numbers, and his ketones also increased.
Sunday morning, again, just to prove no, it wasn't a fluke. Glucose 3.8, ketones 4.8. All right, so that was 6:30 yesterday morning, about this time. So now I'm going to eat a steak, and we're going to talk about why your blood glucose goes up a little bit when you eat a steak, but what happens about an hour later, okay? So let's have a look at this. It didn't knock me out of ketosis. That's the first thing. Now people will go, oh, hang on, Stephen, look, 102 milligrams per deciliter for your glucose. That's kicked you out of ketosis if they didn't know what your ketones rating were. My ketones are still 4.2.
It turns out that actually his glucose did increase, sure, but he wasn't being kicked out of ketosis. In fact, he went into even deeper ketosis, it seems. I have been saying this for months. I made a video months ago talking about how gluconeogenesis can be supply driven. It doesn't necessarily have to be demand driven. It's mostly demand driven, but if you consume enough protein, it becomes supply driven. And sure, that means that you can have a rise in glucose, but it doesn't mean, and I said this. Now, this last suggestion would suggest that a certain I to G ratio is not what is required to preserve electrolytes, thyroid hormone production, and other important processes in the body that tend to fail to be preserved in a bona fide instance of long-term ketosis, but rather an absolute level of insulin, therefore making it possible for someone to still exhibit a low I to G ratio while simultaneously exhibiting a sufficient absolute level of insulin to maintain these processes in the body. After further thought, you can actually have an elevation in the absolute level of insulin that is sufficient to stimulating anabolic processes like thyroid hormone production and electrolyte maintenance, while also simultaneously exhibiting an even higher increase in glucagon, meaning that the ratio actually goes down, I to G ratio goes down, but the absolute level of insulin reaches a point where you actually still get electrolyte maintenance and you get thyroid hormone production adequate. I called it. I'm so glad that this happened. I'm so glad that someone actually publicized their anecdote about this. I said that this doesn't mean that you are necessarily kicked out of ketosis. Why did I say that? What was my mechanism? Well, my mechanism was exactly what Coach Stephen verified. This was all theoretical and speculative, but I had a very strong feeling about this. When you consume protein, you do have an increase in insulin, but you also have an increase in glucagon. And I suspected that the increase in glucagon would cause more glucose production from the liver, because the glucagon has an effect on that, and more ketone production, because glucagon also mediates that. Glucagon is a hormone that is involved in gluconeogenesis, ketogenesis, fatty acid oxidation, glycogenolysis, lipolysis, basically, etc., etc. So, sure, you can have an increase in glucagon causing increased glucose and also increased ketone production, okay? You actually go into deeper ketosis this way. Insulin rises, which is important for anabolic activity, such as maintaining thyroid function, thyroid hormone production, electrolyte maintenance at the level of the kidney. But you can also have an increase in glucagon that has no effect on those things, therefore allowing you to actually go into deeper ketosis, having a low I to G ratio, insulin to glucagon ratio, after you eat as compared to where you were before you ate, while also still raising your insulin, maintaining all these functions that are considered to, go to shit, to put it lightly, to put it informally. When you stay in ketosis for long periods of time, it actually has nothing to do with ketosis. It has to do with just lower insulin. Those are not the same thing. So what do I really mean by this, if we're really going to go into deep detail on this? Let's just throw hypothetical numbers out there. Let's say that your insulin to glucagon ratio is 3 to 5. So it's at 0.6, basically. Okay. Now, after you consume protein, let's say that you go to 6 to 12 insulin to glucagon ratio. So now your ratio is 0.5. It went down lower. It went down, okay? but your insulin doubled. Well, it turns out that when it comes to thyroid hormone function, electrolyte maintenance, etc., all these things that, again, typically are said to be inadequately maintained when on, a ketogenic diet, when you're in continuous ketosis, all of those processes are solely mediated by insulin. Therefore, it only matters what the absolute concentration of insulin is. It doesn't matter what your I to G ratio is in terms of whether those things will be maintained. So just because your I to G ratio goes lower, it doesn't mean that you've put your thyroid hormone production rate and thyroid function and electrolyte maintenance and all that stuff at risk. You haven't, because you've doubled your insulin. There's no glucagon receptors on any of these processes, which means it only matters that your insulin goes up. It doesn't matter what the respective glucagon value is. Okay? I know that this is getting into deeper science, but this is something that needs to be considered whenever people are talking about the risk of being in continuous ketosis. It turns out, I've made the mistake of saying, oh, you want to bump yourself out of ketosis when you consume protein. That is not true. That's not really what I've been meaning to say, because I said in the videos that I'm referring to, that's not exactly true, okay? You want to consume sufficient protein to stimulate sufficient insulin, okay? Usually in the fed state, in a ketogenic fed state, you go into deeper ketosis. You produce more ketones. Yes, you produce more glucose, but the glucose is not being used to create energy. You're still using ketones. You're still using ketones and fatty acids for fuel. So, continuous ketosis for years and years on end is not dangerous. Insufficient insulin for that period of time is dangerous. You need to be consuming sufficient protein to stimulate sufficient insulin, irrespective of the I to G ratio. Just focus on the absolute level of insulin in this respect. That is what matters. I am so glad. Thank you, Coach Steven. I actually emailed you, Coach Steven, if you're watching. I emailed you about this. I haven't gotten a response back, but it's probably because you're busy. Thank you for proving this. You have the materials. You have the equipment to prove it. I have been saying this for months, and now it's no longer theory. It has been proven. So, this is awesome stuff. This was breaking news to me. You might not find it as entertaining as I do and fascinating, but oh boy, I loved watching that. That was great. So people like Cole Robinson, Mark Bell, oh, you're not in ketosis because you're just consuming protein. No, you are in ketosis. You're in deeper ketosis. You can't just look at the level of glucose in isolation. Oh, well, your glucose goes up, so no, they're not in ketosis. They're not in ketosis. Yes, they are. Yes, they absolutely are. Okay? Their glucose going up does not mean that they aren't in ketosis. Okay? That has no bearing on whether the glucose is actually being oxidized or not. It's not. Okay? But anyway, yes, so for people that are worried, you're not bumping yourself out of ketosis at all when you consume more protein. In fact, you're actually going into deeper ketosis, despite the fact that your glucose goes up. Okay? So, with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If this was informative, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, what are you doing? What are you doing? It must be that brain frog. It must be that brain fog from, consuming no carbohydrates to speak of, because carbs are your brain food. Carbs are brain food, bruh. Anyway, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. What have your experiences been when you consume protein, when you look at a CGM, or when you compare that to your ketone meter, or whatever it may be? Do you actually measure this stuff out of curiosity to get a better understanding of your body? And if so, let me know in the comments what you've actually been seeing, what you've seen in your practice, so to speak. And also, buy my book, Contraindicated, it's greasy right now. I got tallow on it. Hey guys, if you needed any more proof that I'm a hardcore carnivore, so it doesn't look too pretty right now, but that won't be the case when you order it if you haven't already. And if you haven't already, come on, what are you doing? Link in the description below for the hardcover, paperback, and audiobook versions. And fortunately, I finally found a way to get my ebook out in refillable format on every single format. Google Play Books, Google Books, whatever it's called. I don't even use it. I don't use it, so I don't even know what it's called. But it'll be on there. Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Apple Books. It'll be on everything as soon as possible. I finally found a way. I told you it was in the works. I'd slog over this stuff every single day. So, it's coming soon. But for now, not available. But the other three, they are. Self-narrated, by the way. Link in the description below for those copies. Also, subscribe to the Patreon if you haven't already to gain access to 1 week early uploads. You could have seen this a week earlier if you're watching on YouTube. Ad-free content, uncensored content, and also an exclusive Discord server. And also, the link on the bottom of the screen. What is that link? Well, that is a link that will bring you to an amazing site with amazing products from an amazing brand known as Cerule. If you purchase product through that link, you will get a permanent percentage discount and permanent free shipping when signing up for monthly deliveries. And if you email me behind the scenes at edgoki14@gmail.com, I can tell you how to earn those products for free. Because who in their right mind wouldn't want that? But I wouldn't suggest buying any products from anybody or any brand at all if you don't know what they are in the first place. Don't do that. So, fortunately for you, I have a video linked in the top right corner of the screen, which is a video elucidation, an explanation of what these products are, who should take them, why you should take them, when to take them, etc., etc. And I'll also further migrate to the description below to find a video that I did on these products in further detail, as well as the company of Cerule itself, which I think is incredibly important if you're willing to contribute towards the company with a purchase. You don't know where your money's going? Well, I have a video explaining just that. So, with that being said, join me next time when we are reacting to more groundbreaking news, like vegans being absolutely incompetent or something, or the sugar dieters being absolutely ridiculous, inane, asinine, ignorant, nescient, arrogant, haughty, blah, 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 blah. So, till then.